What is up guys, my name is Chase and we have talked about some of the best video game controllers on this channel before. So now I thought it would be fun to go to the opposite side. Today we're gonna talk about some of the worst video game controllers of all time, in my opinion. For our first controller, we're gonna go back in time to the Nintendo 64 controller. This controller is like notoriously bad, and I'm gonna try my best not to sound like a stupid little zoomer here. So we do have to give credit where credit is due. With Nintendo's first console that was capable of 3D games, it would make sense that they would be unsure of how to make a controller that supported their 3D games. So the Nintendo 64 controller is weird, if anything, just because it was the first of its kind. Now, if we remove our nostalgia goggles, this is a weird as heck controller. And I think what it comes down to is the fact that you have these 3 prongs at the bottom. I'm very curious what the thought process was in making these 3 prongs on a single controller. The fact that you can't have your hands on all 3 of these prongs is, I don't know, it's just weird. But yeah, it's just like weird to hold, especially when you compare it to controllers nowadays. The joystick here is just like very plasticky and like rigid. I mean, looking back at it now, it is very like unique, and it's just something that I think for the time period and the types of games that Nintendo were making, this controller works, like it's usable. But I don't know, it's just like weird. This is just like a weird looking controller. With all of that being said, I will admit that there are some positives with this controller. For one thing, you know, the 3 prongs are weird, but they did at least make it comfortable to hold. Like the way that there are all of these like ridges and little divots in the controller, it just makes it like nice to hold at least. When you have your hand on the middle prong with the joystick, your pointer finger is easily able to access the Z button on the back. I'd say the D-pad and all the buttons like live up to Nintendo's quality, but in any case, this is a weird controller. But I guess it's at least uniquely weird. My second worst video game controller is the PlayStation DualShock 2 and 3. Now listen, for the most part, I don't think the DualShock is terrible. In fact, in my best video game controller video, I said that the DualShock 4 is one of my favorite controllers. But with the DualShock 2 and 3, my absolute biggest gripe with those controllers are the thumbsticks. They are convex thumbsticks, which I don't know why they thought to do that. You know, when you're playing video games and you have your thumbs on the analog sticks, I guess it just makes sense to have the thumbsticks be all slippery and your thumbs can easily fall off. And speaking of your fingers slipping all over the place, the triggers on the back of the controller are at an angle, but there is like no support for your fingers pressing the triggers. So once again, it just feels like your fingers are just slipping off of these triggers. Sorry if I seem very passionate about this, but I always thought the DualShock 2 and 3 were just weird because there was no support for your fingers. It just felt like a slippery controller to use. But once again, looking at the positive side, I will say that the DualShock 2 and 3 are very, like, for the most part, comfortable controllers to use. I've always liked how the buttons felt on PlayStation controllers, and obviously the DualShock must have worked since PlayStation has continued to just reuse the same old DualShock design. Our next worst video game controller is the Wii U gamepad. Of course, this had to make it onto the list. I mean, what can I say about the Wii U gamepad that has not already been said? This is just a chunky mess of a controller. I will say that the concept of it was actually really neat, especially when it was first revealed. You know, having this tablet controller complete with like a screen on it. It seemed super futuristic. I know I was very, very excited to actually see the Wii U in person, but the Wii U gamepad came with a lot of quirks. For one thing, battery life on this controller is just absolutely miserable. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that this is just a bloated controller. Obviously, it needs battery life to power the screen, but you also have a bunch of just random doodads thrown into this controller. Like a front-facing camera, you had the NFC touchpad. So I think the Wii U gamepad was just trying to reinvent the wheel too much. And I know for me personally, one of the things that completely like ruined the gamepad is the fact that there is such a short distance that you can use the gamepad from the console. One of the Wii U's features that was very often advertised was the fact that you can play on the gamepad exclusively without the TV. I wish they had a big bold asterisk on that, because you can't play on the gamepad within like, I don't know the exact number, but it felt like 10 or 20 feet from the console. That was a really sad reality to come to for me. And I think the nail in the coffin for the Wii U gamepad was when Nintendo started making games for the Wii U that made absolutely no use of the gamepad. Now after the Wii U, of course we ended up getting the Nintendo Switch. And hopefully this time around Nintendo could get controllers right. These are the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. Listen, I think the Switch Joy-Con, at the very least, are interesting. I mean, if you want to talk about some of the good things with the Joy-Con, obviously, just the fact that they are able to pack a controller into this tiny little size, I think that's a really great feat. And not only that, you do have some of like the gimmick features that Nintendo is known for nowadays. Obviously, no Nintendo controller in 2017 is complete without motion control. The HD rumble in the Joy-Con, I think, can be cool sometimes. And in the end, I mean, just the versatility of these Joy-Con, I think, are very interesting. Obviously, you have so many different play styles that you can use the Joy-Con in. You can have them completely separated, you can put them into the Joy-Con grip, you can connect them to the Nintendo Switch console itself, and of course, you can use them on its side. But with all of that being said, there are obviously some serious problems with the Joy-Con. Personally, I have been lucky enough to not experience Joy-Con drift. For me, the biggest problem I've had with Joy-Con since day one has just been the Bluetooth range. From what I've read online, the Joy-Con use a specific type of Bluetooth that basically is not good for long-range use. So I've always had problems with Joy-Con disconnecting from my Switch. I have a whole video on my channel where I go through Nintendo support and try to get my Joy-Con fixed. Also, these are definitely not the most comfortable controllers to use. Like, the buttons are way too clicky in my opinion. The thumbsticks are just a bit like weird to use. And don't even get me started trying to use these on their side. But once again, you have these trade-offs to make these controllers very versatile and small, compact, and portable. But if you were to ask me what controller I want to use with my Nintendo Switch, it's definitely not these ones. And for our last controller, I can pretty confidently say that this is the worst video game controller I've used ever. And that is the Ouya controller. What an awful, awful controller. Now, before I absolutely rip into this controller, let's try to find some of the good things about this controller first. I mean, for the most part, at least they got the basics of a video game controller down. They didn't necessarily try to reinvent the wheel here. It is just your basic, average, run-of-the-mill video game controller. And for the most part, it is like pretty comfortable. The analog sticks feel fine, although they made the PlayStation mistake and made these analog sticks convex instead of concave. The D-pad is like not the worst ever. I'd even say the Xbox 360 D-pad is worse than this one. In order to power this controller, you take off these face plates, and then there's like a little battery compartment in there. I don't know, depending on how you look at it, maybe this could be a pro, maybe it's a con. But I can see some people enjoying the fact that you can power this through batteries and that they're so like easily accessible. And speaking of which, Ouya also sold some different colored faceplates. So if you wanted to kind of customize your Ouya controller, you could. And that's always fun because I am such a sucker for new colors of controllers. Oh, I almost forgot that they have like a unique feature in this controller, which is that there's actually a trackpad here at the top of the controller. This made it easier to navigate Android OS, which is the operating system that Ouya ran. So I don't know, if anything, that's like unique to this controller at least. But now that we said everything nice about this, let's get ready, boys and girls. We're gonna rip into this controller. This is like one of the worst controllers ever. For me, what absolutely ruined this controller was the fact that the Bluetooth was absolutely not good enough. There was a point where I was having like friends and family over to play the Ouya, and all of our controllers would disconnect from the console. I remember reading some anecdotes where people were saying if you laid down the Ouya sidewards, like it improves the Bluetooth. Like, the fact that you would even have to do that, I think is just so ridiculous. Also, this controller is just the most cheap plastic feeling thing ever. Like, the triggers just feel like they took an old used piece of plastic and just cut it out with scissors. Like, it's just so bad. This is just not a great controller. It just feels extremely cheap and just plastic and just, I don't know, it just feels gross. Sorry I had to do that to you, Ouya controller. But anyway, those are, in my opinion, the worst video game controllers of all time. Let me know in the comments what you guys think are the worst video game controllers. And if you want to check out my video where I talk about some of the best video game controllers, check it out below. For now, thank you so much for watching. My name is Chase, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.